Last one from Stephanie. She said, how to deal with a child who appears okay, but has a lot of anger. Girl, you are describing my oldest child. He's 18 now. Well, he'll be 18 in 5 days. Lord. He was 6 years old when his father died in front of him. He was running backwards in a relay race and tripped and fell, and hit his head on the ground and died in about 30 minutes in front of my son. We took my husband to the hospital. He died before he got to the hospital. I believe he was probably gone before he got into the ambulance. And when I got home to tell my son what happened, he looked at me and he said, Dad's dead. And that in and of itself was the hardest question anybody has ever asked me, and continues to be the hardest question anybody has ever asked me in my life. And I was unable to say yes. I said, no, he's in heaven. And we went from there. And my child did not cry. He didn't cry when I said, no, he went to heaven. He didn't cry on the day of the funeral, even though he didn't go. I didn't allow him to go and see that. And I didn't want him to have that memory. He cried about other things that seemed to be misplaced or displaced. He had displaced anger, where he seemed overly angry about things that shouldn't have made somebody that angry. You can't get your shoe on, so you throw the shoe and have a whole tantrum. You can't finish your work in class, so you decide to hide under the desk. You don't want to pay attention in class, so you lean back in your chair and tell the teacher you want to die like dad. Like, that's what my child was doing at 6 and 7 years old. So it was obvious to me that he had some anger that he wasn't expressing in ways that would connect to the grief. So I couldn't connect to him and say, are you mad about daddy? Because he would shut down. He wouldn't talk to me. So what I did then was got him a counselor. Something that I say every time I talk about children and child grief on these question and answer sessions is that in Maryland, I need to do the research and find out if it's like that across the board. But I know in Maryland, pediatricians, part of their job is to evaluate children dealing with loss. You tell them, my child just lost a parent. They go, okay, they know exactly what to do. They evaluate that child, no matter what age they are, for a counselor and see whether or not counseling is something they need. And they come back to you after the visit or during the visit, depending on how old the child is. And they say, okay, this is the plan. They refer you to somebody that's in network for you, and they give you some options out of network for you, just in case. And my child had a therapist for a little while. He seemed okay. It was play therapy because he was so young, and my youngest son too was only barely 2 years old. So it was play therapy for both of them. But they seemed to progress in that. The counselor would come back and say, today we drew a picture of dad. Today we did this. Today we did that. And he expressed this. They would get progress to happen with the child that sometimes, because you're mommy, you can't do, because you're part of the situation to him. You are part of the collateral damage that has happened in this situation. So it's kind of like if you trip and fall and get a scrape on your knee, it's kind of like the sidewalk coming up to say, hey, are you okay? Like, bro, you were there, you're kind of part of this, and you're going to be here for the rest of every time. And every time I come outside, I'm going to see the sidewalk. It's going to remind me of my bruise, or my cut. So same thing with being mommy. You're part of the situation. So every time they think about the fact that daddy is not there, or every time they see you, they think about the fact that daddy is not there. So it's kind of hard for them. Now, some kids are closer and they're able to communicate, but some kids aren't. Every kid is different. So I would definitely say to consult your pediatrician and find out whether or not a counselor is a good idea. I think that's always a good idea. I don't think it can ever hurt to have a counselor, and especially since they allow you to come in to the sessions with them just in case, to kind of wean them onto being able to talk to the pediatrician or the counselor, psychiatrist, or psychologist, whichever you are referred to on their own. I think it's a stigma within our community as solo moms, as mothers, as parents, as Black women, as I think it runs rampant through a lot of different communities about psychiatrists and mental health and needing mental help being a stigma where, oh, we only do that if the person's crazy, and we don't, we use the words that, are politically incorrect, but they describe somebody who has no control. And that's not what mental health is for. It's not just for people who don't have physical control. It's also for people who just need help sorting through their feelings and actively living through and growing through what's going on in their lives. So, and that's definitely something that children need help with, because at certain ages, they tend to feel extremely alone, like they're the only person feeling this because this is the first time they've ever felt this before. Hey, it's Maya and Dion, and if you liked that video and it was helpful for you, comment below and check out some of my other videos about solo parenting and all things widowhood. Thanks for watching.